Welcome to the Food Junkies Podcast. Here, we aim to bring you the experience, strength, and hope of professionals working on the front lines in the field of food addiction. Our mission is to educate you, the listener, and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a recognized disorder. Here, we discuss all things recovery, exploring the many pathways people take towards abstinence in order to achieve a health-forward lifestyle. We hope to inspire you to thrive rather than just survive. So stay positive, make a change for yourself, and share your journey with others. And hopefully the message will spread.
Welcome to the Food Junkies Podcast. My name is Dr. Vera and I am your co-host today along with Clarissa Kennedy, speaking with Brian Baumal, a registered psychotherapist based in Toronto. He is the owner of Aliva Psychotherapy, a practice focused on weight management, eating disorders, food addiction, and psychological support around bariatric surgery. He completed his psychotherapy training at the Gestalt Institute of Toronto, graduating in 2010, and is a member of the College of Registered Psychotherapists of Ontario, where he has been licensed since 2015. Identifying as a food addict himself, Brian lost 100 pounds and has kept it off for over 14 years. So welcome, Brian.
It is a pleasure to be here with you both.
Tell us about how you got into the weight loss field.
As you mentioned, I lost 100 pounds myself, and initially I just had a general practice. I never connected weight management, food addictions, eating disorders to my practice for a while. And after about 4 or 5 years into practice, I was not very satisfied being a generalist. At that time, you're dealing with depression, anxiety, OCD, personality disorders, grief, trauma, the whole bit. And I realized I needed to get specialized in something. And so I just remember sitting down one day and saying, all right, what am I going to do? And then I realized, oh my God, I've lost 100 pounds. I kept it off for about 4 or 5 years at that point. And then I realized therapist who lost 100 pounds can help you do same. There's a specialization, there's a good sort of marketing hook, and it was off to the races from there.
What your aha moment was that you needed special training. Why did food addiction speak to you?
Food addiction spoke to me because after I lost weight, I had a food addiction moment which literally changed my life. I had lost the weight, and in that process, tapered off of sugars and carbohydrates, and didn't really know about food addiction at that time. This was prior to us meeting Vera through a gentleman named Tony Vasallo. And I just tapered off because that was what you do to lose weight. And then I became abstinent for about 6 or 7 weeks. I just decided that it was the right thing to do. I could handle it. And I was abstinent from it. And then in around 2015 or 16, I went to a Hanukkah holiday party. And not really knowing the concept of abstinence or food addiction, when I go to holiday parties, I would tend to eat what was there. And I had a simple holiday gold foiled coin, the size of a loonie or a toonie. And I had an addictive reaction that changed my life. My vision actually changed. My brain was taken over. Must have chocolate, must have chocolate. I was looking for the nearest source of chocolate, and I vividly remember this. Between me and the nearest source of chocolate was somebody who had recovered from surgery and was using a walker or a cane, and I had visions of tackling that person out of the way to get to the chocolate. And I didn't do it. I was just very fortunate to step away from, or in my mind, step away from that and say, oh my God, there's something going on here. I don't have to act on this, but could be along for the ride on it. After about 20 minutes, when everything returned to normal, I was like, oh my God, thank God I'm alive. I knew I wasn't going I knew there were no sort of mortality issues, but I realized this was not just a craving. This was not just the most intense craving I had. this was on an entirely different scale or an entirely different spectrum. And I still didn't know that was food addiction. But at the time, that was around 2015 and 16, and you and I had just met, and we would often go to Tony Vasallo's food addiction programs. And I started telling this story to people, and everyone who was a food addict would tap me on the shoulder. I'd say, Brian, that's what I go through every day of my life. The disordered eating people, but the food addicts would tap me on the shoulder. And I just said, wow, there is something to food addiction. And then the empathy and the compassion comes out with, wow, if that's what you have to deal with every day of your life. I tell people that if that's what I had to deal with every day of my life, I don't know if I would have been alive, because I don't know how I could have managed that on a daily basis to get myself to the point where I am now. So it was at that point where I said, I have to recognize that I am a food addict, and I have to treat food addiction as a very powerful, I don't want to say enemy, but a very powerful condition that can be absolutely debilitating to people.
What a great story to illustrate that. Can you just give a background about Gestalt therapy and what drew you to it?
Sure. So I registered 22 years ago, and really I chose the Institute not because of the methodology at all, but it had been around for about 20 to 30 years before. The Gestalt method was very well established, and compared to other training institutes in terms of length of time, reputation, technique, I said, yep, this is a place to go. So we often say Gestalt chooses us rather than the other way around. Now, having said that, Gestalt is an esoteric brand of therapy. I sometimes call it the ADHD of therapies. What I mean by that is we can take anything that a patient or a client presents us with, or anything that we notice, and turn it into the topic of therapy. And just very briefly, the way Gestalt works is, let's say an individual in front of me is exhibiting a classic psychological defense mechanism. And defense mechanisms are behaviors we employ to avoid things like anxiety, depression, shame, or difficult emotions. So we bring up these behaviors to avoid that. Intellectualization, even use of humor, avoiding emotion could be some of the defense mechanisms. The Gestalt therapist, rather than saying, you're intellectualizing, or you're using humor, the Gestalt therapist jumps into that with the patient and says, or takes an outlook of, you are using this defense mechanism with me at this moment. So what is going on between the two of us that may be bringing up either the defense mechanism or the anxiety or the shame that underlies it? So how are we creating the conditions under which you use these defense mechanisms? And then we start with those questions in mind, we go from there. So Gestalt is a relational kind of therapy.
Thank you so much, Brian, for describing Gestalt theory. But I'm really excited to dive into what we hope to talk about today, which is perfectionism. And
yes,
we see it so frequently in the work that we do with clinicians. And I am excited to hear your take on it, because I think there has a lot to do with shame and stigma of obesity and addiction, but also diet culture makes perfectionism so strong. And so
yes.
I'm really curious about how you distinguish between adaptive perfectionism and maladaptive perfectionism in the context of food addiction and eating disorder recovery.
There are two things in there. First of all, adaptive and maladaptive ways of dealing with perfectionism. But you had also talked about shame and diet culture and the impact of that. Let's start there and then get into what maladaptive and adaptive perfectionism looks like. I have a very easy way of explaining shame and diet culture and toxic perfectionism in just a few sentences. Addiction and obesity cause us shame. Most people would readily agree with that. One of the things that shame does to us is it makes us say, I do not like who I am. And that thought can either be very conscious or very unconscious. But shame basically says, I am not worthy, I'm not a good person, society doesn't view me as a worthy individual. So in that situation, what ends up happening is we create an image of ourselves that would be acceptable to society and to ourselves. And that image often directly comes from diet culture. I'm going to be the person that does this or that. About half a dozen times a year on an intake, I will hear someone say to me, I want to be the person that wakes up 5:30 in the dead of Canadian winter, runs half a marathon, comes home, makes their perfect meal, gets the kids ready. Brian, turn me into this. That's a little bit of a simplification of what they say, but that is the image that people want to adopt. And of course, that's generally unrealistic for most of us. No one likes getting up at the dead of winter. We do it. Sometimes we do it. We just don't necessarily like it. So what shame does, combined with diet culture, is shame makes us way overshoot the person that we want to be. That's what shame fundamentally does. So shame makes us say, I don't like myself, therefore I want to be a different person, but that different person is way overcompensated for in what we can actually do. And so people get this idealized image in their head as a result of shame. They can't live up to that standard, and boom, they have failed. So when I tell people this, when I say it is shame completely overshooting the mark, what do we do from there? And then I often tell people with a little bit of my Gestalt training, I say, you know what? There's nothing wrong with having a different image for yourself. That is why you're here. Gestalt, and I learned this from a famous Gestalt therapist named Irvin Polster. He said, the task of therapy is becoming the person you want to be while being the person you are. So rather than just having this idealized image that we work towards, we have to start from where you are, and that grounds people. Mm-hmm. That answers the first question. And then the second question of what is maladaptive shame and what is toxic shame, basically that is where people have this over-idealized image of themselves that I mentioned, and that's what they work towards. So failure is not an option. Food addiction requires abstinence. It's going to be the perfect abstinence for me. And therefore, I'm going to lose weight really quickly. And I will never screw up. And I will be the one who goes to an ice cream party and resists the ice cream. And I'm going to do it effortlessly. There's going to be no angst on my part. And they want to just sweep all of the difficulty involved in abstinence, all the realism involved in abstinence. They want to sweep it aside. So that's one thing that toxic perfectionism does, is it just lets sweep under the rug any difficulty that will happen, rather than preparing for it, accepting it, working through a slip up or a relapse when it happens. If you just followed the patient or the client on this, you'd never create a relapse plan for I'm not going to relapse. I'm going to be perfect. Shouldn't we create a relapse plan in all of this? So that's a little bit of both how shame creates this idealized image and how we get into this sort of toxic perfectionism.
So maladaptive perfectionism to you is these unrealistic expectations of myself and not addressing or accepting that relapse is a part of recovery, slips will happen. And if I don't have a plan for that, it's actually setting myself up for maybe more pain.
Or complete failure in that case. I have heard people, both personally and through my practice, they will abstain from sugar for a year, have a slip up, and that's it. It's gone. And I'm like, it may take a couple of weeks of angst and recovery to get it out of your system, but that's all you've got to do. And of course, it's very difficult. It's not easy to manage that, but you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater in that case. And that is toxic perfectionism. Another sign of toxic perfectionism can very well be when people actually do well on abstinence, on recovery. And then they're like, I'm doing so well. Where else can I make my life better? And that creates transfer addictions or overuse of online shopping and an extreme focus on weight as the goal. I'm doing so well. Wow, I can get my weight down. Wow, I'm doing so well. The promotion I got was definitely because I'm thinner and now I've got money and let's go and spend it all. So toxic perfectionism or maladaptive perfectionism can also be a runaway train if you're not careful.
How would you work with the individual who's coming to see you and you're picking up on some of this and maybe they have had a slip or they're still talking about how frustrated they are that they haven't been able to wake up at 5:30 and do the workout? And often I think I've found with these individuals is that, yeah, they may be at it for a month. They haven't dropped 30, 40 pounds and they're starting to lose that external motivation.
Yeah. So in some ways, the prep has to come first, like understanding that toxic perfectionism or maladaptive behaviors are likely to slip in. We talked early about my own story with recovery. I don't mind saying to people that doing this for 14 years, every now and again, I still get those thoughts in me. And we have to have active tools to combat those when they happen. So let's prepare people for that. And let's get them aware of the fact that you could start this with some of the most perfect intentions. Yep, I just want to abstain from my trigger foods so that my mind isn't racing all the time with food. That is a very sort of adaptive and functional approach to food addiction. And we could say, let's start there, but let's make sure it doesn't shift over into the scale too much, or let's make sure that you're not over exercising, that kind of thing. So we'll give them signposts. The other thing too is if they have a relapse, an actual relapse, we can have a relapse plan in place. But the way I tend to do that is I say, okay, we are gathering data here. Okay, this is an experiment for us to see what caused it, what happened, the degree of relapse. And I think that's really important in all of this. When we want to eliminate black and white thinking, yes, you've had a relapse, but that doesn't mean 100% failure. What is going on for you? How long did the relapse happen for? What was the food? What caused it? Can we learn from all of this? So I often tell people we are engaging in an experiment in all of this. And when you relapse, we are going to gather data around it. The two questions I always ask people is, does your food volume increase as a result of this relapse? And is your food noise increasing as a result of this relapse? Let's tie the relapse to the main goals that we are trying to deal with and gauge what the impact is on those factors and take that data and go from there.
As you're talking, I'm also wondering, how do you work with individuals? Because perfectionism is so celebrated in the recovery world, right? I have 25 years of weighed and measured meals,
Yeah.
perfect perfectly, right? And like, where's my tip and where's my celebration and reward?
Mhm.
And there's also weight loss is celebrated. Oh, wow, you're doing it so well. And so, how can that actually become maladaptive in some ways?
All of this, when I work with eating disordered patients in particular, but what you're describing in the food addiction world is the same. So I say with eating disorders, and the example you're giving is recovery can be like a runaway train. And once you get on that runaway train, then you're in trouble. But no one wakes up and finds themselves on a runaway train. You've got to plan where you want to go. You got to buy your ticket. You got to pack your luggage. You got to get to the train station, get on the train. The train starts normally, and then it becomes a runaway train. So each time someone says to me, I'm focusing on weight, or Brian, I'm down 5 pounds. Often my response, and I'm going to exaggerate it, would be a little bit, oh, great, you're down 5 pounds. Isn't it a pity the Toronto Maple Leafs haven't won a Stanley Cup in 60 years? In other words, what else can we talk about? Make the point of not focusing on the weight. I work with an individual, he's wonderful, but he has some clinical, psychological, and psychiatric features that make him focus on the weight, no matter how hard I directly say to him, we can't do that. But what he does notice about me is when he says, Brian, I've lost 3 pounds. And I say, all right, what else is going on? He will say to me, why don't you focus on my weight? I say, because if we do that, you're going to wind up counting calories again. And I can't have that happen with you. So all those stops along the runaway train, counting, starting to count calories, starting to focus on weight, the chips, and having perfectly weighed meals, and so on and so forth, I will treat as things that are going to make you worse if we don't manage them.
Yeah, because what I'm hearing is if we're putting all our attention and focus into this, then my life is actually getting so much smaller, right?
Oh,
Maybe I'm not going out as much anymore. Maybe I'm not socializing as much. Maybe my quality of life has started to diminish because of the hyper focus and desire to achieve in this area has become my whole life.
and all you're doing is really taking the obsessive thoughts around food and putting them somewhere else. As a technical note, I think the obsessive thoughts around food and addiction, the mechanisms in the brain that cause that obsession are very different than the sort of shame-based mechanisms that cause overfocus on weight and appearance and so on and so forth. But the quality of life issues are exactly the same. You're just going from the pot into the frying pan. You're still over focusing on these things, and your life's quality diminishes as well.
So what I'm hearing is it's also really important for you to know what symptoms are showing up and whether they're eating disorder or their food addiction in order for you to determine the treatment or the clinical way the conversations you're supposed to be having around
Oh, yes.
and
Oh,
challenging that can be.
oh, geez. Yeah. If people are looking at me on video, if this is going on video, you will see a 57-year-old male with graying hair. The fact is, I'm only 27. Focusing on what becomes an eating disorder in the context of food addiction, pre-recovery, post-recovery is what makes me look 57 years old. We are getting into very complex but very necessary territory. I am glad to look 57 years old to help people sort through that. I generally say that any change in a person's relationship with food, be it caused by disordered eating, be it caused by recovery through food addiction, be it caused by GLP-1 or bariatric surgery, any change in someone's relationship with food can lead to a full-blown eating disorder and or a sort of full-blown overfocus on these factors. Sometimes I work with patients. I'm thinking of one right now where they know they have a food addiction and they've read about food addiction, they've read about eating disorders, they read about runaway trains, and they will come to me and they will say, I don't want to weigh myself. Brian, help me make sure I don't weigh myself in all of this. And so there are some who are very aware of that, and others where we have to educate them a little bit differently. And if we're going to use a Gestalt approach, here we are talking about abstinence, and you're talking about fitting into clothing that is two sizes too small for you. What's going on right now? Am I even doing something like that? Is there something in my background, maybe something in my story that is making you want to overachieve on that kind of thing?
No, that's great. Hey, Food Junkies listeners. We're just going to take a quick break here to share with you something our team thinks could help benefit your recovery with food, body, or self. Thank you again for listening. Hey, Food Junkies listeners, Clarissa here, and I'm excited to announce our brand new Sweet Sobriety Workshop series for July. Is your light making you hungry? The hidden science behind craving, sleep, energy, and metabolic health. What if one of the missing pieces in your recovery isn't another food plan or another supplement or more willpower? What if it's light? Most of us know that what we eat matters, but very few of us think about when we eat, when we sleep, and the light our eyes absorb throughout the day, and how that can profoundly influence cravings, mood, metabolism, hormones, energy, and even our recovery from food addiction. This workshop may completely change the way you think about your health. We're thrilled to welcome back Victoria Hamma. She's a biopsychosocial wellness practitioner specializing in circadian rhythm and red light therapy. Victoria brings together cutting-edge science along with something equally valuable, lived experience. Her passion is translating complex science into practical tools that people can begin using immediately. So this is a two-part course, and part one is an online module, and it's called An Introduction to Circadian Rhythm, and it is $20 US. In this module, you'll explore what your circadian rhythm actually is, how light, sleep, and food communicate with your brain, how circadian disruption affects health, mood, cravings, and metabolism, what red light therapy is and why everyone is talking about it, the benefits and safe use of red light therapy at home, blue light blockers, and when they can actually help. Then part two is the deep dive. This is an online module and a live question and answer with Victoria, and that cost is $35 US. For those ready to dive deeper into the science, you'll explore how your eyes absorb light and regulate your body's master clock, the role of UVA and UVB light, how diabetes and cataracts can disrupt circadian function, the fascinating relationship between food timing, sugar, and metabolism, what the research says about intermittent fasting and red light therapy, mitochondrial dysfunction in modern disease, and how combining circadian rhythm strategies with red light therapy may create powerful synergies for healing and long-term wellness. At Sweet Sobriety, we believe recovery isn't about trying harder. So you can sign up for part one now, and part two with the live Q&A is going to happen July 24th at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're so excited to have this course with you and continue providing you with these amazing resources. See you there. Now back to the show. If you have enjoyed this episode, please let us know. We love to hear from you. Kindly leave us a review on whatever platform you listen to our podcast on. We love getting feedback from our listeners. So do you, like, when in food addiction recovery, we talk a lot about abstinence and how that's really important and a protective intervention for individuals. How do you help them in an individualized way that remains psychologically flexible and compassionate rather than what we associate with because I like to think of, instead of a defense mechanism, I would call perfectionism a coping strategy. Protective, right? Because if I protect myself, then people won't judge me. So it's protecting me from that shame. So, but it's also very challenging to get people to let go of that. And so what often we see is people then this drive is often based on punishment and fear. And so when we're talking about abstinence in general, how do you work with clients to see that it's not punishment or, that is driven by fear?
Yeah, I'm going to say a couple of things. First of all, I'm opening up a can of worms by saying that food addiction is not recognized by the DSM or the WHO. But I use that to my advantage. I took judo as a child, and you use your opponent's strength against them. And here's what I say. I say there's research on food addiction. There absolutely is, but it's in a liminal space right now. And what that means is that we create our own recovery plans. We've got some very good information and very good data about what guides us. And then I employ my list of adverbs. Here's what I say. I say, because we have to chart this because we have to chart this for you, we are going to approach this. It's adjectives, a list of adjectives. So I say we're going to approach this in a very sane, rational, controlled, measured, experimental, easygoing way for you that creates a plan. And what I say to them is I say, I'm not here sitting on high as an expert saying, I've read the research, I know you got to do this or that or the other, kaboom. That's how we go and do it. I use those adjectives or adverbs and I say, we're going to do this in a way that works for you. Another thing that I say is I'm a psychotherapist. I am not a nutritionist or a personal trainer or a physician. And I say to them, my implied goal with you is to look out for your psychological health and your psychological relationship with food. It is not to get your weight down as fast as possible. That is not to be disrespectful of other professions in any way. That's their implied goal. That's their implied goal with you, is to get the weight down. That's what they do. My goal is to look out for that psychological health for people. So those are some of the ways I just address the issues in a very calm and measured manner.
Do you find that curiosity, you use the term gather data, experiment, do you find that? How do you help them make that shift? Because that sounds really scary, because I believe usually if I'm somebody with maybe maladaptive perfectionism, that there is a quote unquote.
Perfect. So I will ask them straight up. I will say, what do you think of what again, get into the present moment with them. And I will say, what do you think of what I'm telling you? Does this cause you a bit of anxiety? Do you think that if you take this slowly, you're failing? What is going on for you right now? And I can even, a lot of times, people who come to our doorsteps have tried dozens and dozens of times to lose weight. We know that. And they will say, but Brian, when I take it slowly, but Brian, if I experiment for 3 or 4 months or however long, if I try this carbohydrate and that carbohydrate, or if I eat fruit or abstain from fruit, or if I try all these things, that's what caused me failure in the past. I say, great, that's almost like a little bit of trauma we've got to work on. That's what I think in my head. I say, so what we have to do is get you comfortable with this process, because that's life. This is life. And I understand very much the fear that you have. You did have some watermelon before, and that led you on a complete relapse. What we have to do is reduce the fear of that happening again so that when it does happen, you're in a better position to handle it. So let's take the past experiences, do a bit of exposure therapy around them, and get you to the point where you're not going to fear a relapse when that kind of thing happens.
What about learned experiences? Like if I walk across the street and get hit, I've learned I have to watch. Not that I'm not going to cross the street, but I'm going to watch. So if I've learned that I eat something with a sweetener in it and that causes a relapse, I've learned something. So why would I want to expose myself so that I can eat the sweetener again? I think there must be some kind of a nuance there.
Yes, that's right. If you have, I guess there's a difference between an addictive response so what we have to do in the beginning, you make a very good and subtle point that is very important. If you have found before that sweeteners have caused a relapse, then we have to absolutely avoid the sweeteners.
Or cashews or nuts
or
peanut butter.
Right. We absolutely have to avoid those in the future. But what I want to do is, as we first start, let's validate that actually is the case, if that makes sense. So in the beginning of the process, let's validate that actually happens. So we may expose you to it to begin with, because the relapse could be caused by an addictive response. As you're aware, the sweetener puts us on that addictive pathway, but it could also be this toxic perfectionism of, oh shit, I've failed at this.
Yeah, or there's good and bad foods, and I just ate one of those foods that is not a food addiction approved food, and now I feel guilt and shame, and so it's actually more of a psychological response and slip than an actual substance use slip.
That's a perfect way of saying it. The difference is very subtle, but critical in what you're critical in all of this. So let's just take an experimental approach to begin with. As we start, figure out what the trigger foods are, and then say, yeah, these are foods I absolutely need to avoid. And that's the difference between adaptive perfectionism and maladaptive perfectionism in all of this. If I have sweetener, if I have cashews, I know that this will cause a relapse because of the addictive pathways in the brain. But if someone eats blueberries and that they think that is not on their list of foods, and the slip up is more psychological or more toxic perfectionism, we differentiate between those two points. It's a very, very subtle but very important point in all of this.
When I hear the concept of adaptive and maladaptive as being useful, is a person who has foods that they avoid ends up by accident eating one of them. And then it's like, oh my God, this is a pop with sugar in it instead of a non-sugar. Now I'm screwed. That's a problem, because that's not acknowledging the reality of the world, which is that we always make mistakes.
That's it exactly. And then we get into how much exposure and so on and so forth. But that's it. We don't want to trigger the maladaptive or toxic perfectionism in people. People slip up all the time. And if they do have an addictive relapse, let's not make it worse, Vera. For God's sakes, let's not make it worse. It happens. And let's get that plan in place, and let's just go with the plan. All of us are very trained professionals. And one thing that we learn is when we get into difficult situations, rely on your training. And so let's put emotion aside, or let's compartmentalize. Let's manage that emotion and just rely on the training and on the relapse plan to get us back to where we need to be.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to just be a little bit softer around this, right? And compassion. And when I think of perfectionism, I think of a body that's tight and tense and rigid. And this is the way we do things. And so to get them to just take a breath and be a little softer and get curious and be compassionate is really hard if I have certain attachment styles or personality traits that have set me up, or even life experiences, right? I made that one mistake that time and all these things happen. So I can never make that mistake again. And so are there particular signs or things, situations that maybe can make somebody more vulnerable to maladaptive perfectionism?
Absolutely, there are. So we can talk about an over-controlled individual. We can talk about an anxious individual. We can talk about individuals that are prone to eating disorders, which are a summary or a combination of those. There is trauma, prior trauma in all of this. There is family experience. The family demands perfectionism around food. I can't tell you how many times I hear that anytime people go to a family event, rather than talking about a family member's accomplishments, they talk about food or something like that. An example I give is, I went on a 4-week cruise and vacation, didn't gain a pound. That's all people talk about. They don't talk about the places they went, the sites they had. Again, it's that fear of failure in all of this. And one of the Gestalt methods that I can use, you mentioned you can spot someone who has a very rigid body, and I can do that too. And right in the moment of the session, if I spot that, if I get a sense of that transference or countertransference or undercurrent going on, I may say, maybe you just need to breathe right now. And maybe you need to breathe with me or something like that. Let's try practicing this. And not only do we do that in the moment, but we identify what's causing them the anxiety at that moment in time. So they're learning a skill of, this is something that can make me anxious, and here's how I do it. And it's okay to use a tool. As a matter of fact, when I say that, it's okay to use a tool, one of the maladaptive perfectionism traits or traps that people fall into is they say, it's not okay for me to use. I shouldn't have to use a tool. I should wake up and be abstinent tomorrow without having to use a single tool at all. And what I tell people is that, for myself, after 14 years of managing food addiction, eating disorders, weight, health, and basic metabolic health and blood functions, I still have to use tools on a regular basis to make sure that I don't slip into addictive or eating disorder behaviors. I have to actively use them. And we need to get you to that point as well. There's no shame in using a tool.
I hear that as structure can be a tool, but the point is how you use the tool, not as a hammer to nail yourself, but to help yourself.
No, and that's it. And Vera, we know, for example, with volume addiction or certain kinds of addictive eating patterns, people will need to use scales, for example. People will need to limit their time eating. They'll set a timer on their watch or something like that because they have difficulty with satiety cues. They have difficulty knowing how much they eat. And so those tools are meant to be adaptive rather than a hammer or rather than an oppressive way of doing something. And again, that I am absolutely for people using scales and people time limiting their food, or people only eating in certain places if they need to do it. But that is not for everyone, or that's not the first card we play, or that's something we experiment with.
So I was also wondering if you could just speak a little bit about adaptive perfectionism and what that might look like for someone, because I think the problem in the field is sometimes we see anything that looks like perfectionism as toxic. These individuals are very driven, and there's so much good in perfectionism that it's like, there's all the courses you see out there, get rid of perfectionism, all of this. And if I'm somebody who has perfectionism and I just have high standards, I don't want to get rid of that part of it.
Yes, thank you for saying that, Chrissy.
Wow, that's a really good question. A couple of things that I would say to that. In some cases, we can lean into it. There are a lot of computer programmers, accountants, engineers that I work with who say, I want my data. I want my data. That is who I am. I want to wait. And I just say, okay, as long as it's not going to put you on the runaway train. The thing that I would say to someone that is a perfectionist in all of this is that we need to make sure that you create behaviors that are going to be successful for the long term, that are going to be perfect for you in the long term. And we know that over focus on certain things can put you on that runaway train. So perfectionism is actually the ability to be flexible. You can be perfectly flexible in all of this, because if you are perfectly inflexible, that's where trouble begins. Yeah. And all of what we are doing is just going to go completely to waste.
Okay, good. Brian, I really want to ask about your experience as a chair of the food addiction Facebook group. Tell us about that. How are you finding it?
I assume the role of chair of the Sugar and Food Addiction Professionals Network in the winter. It is an absolute honor to serve on that group. It is a group approaching 200 food addiction professionals that exchange information, that meet on a monthly basis with some of the world leaders in food addiction. My email list of people that I can talk to now includes world famous leaders or rock stars in all of this, and we have them come and present to us. So that is one thing that is one benefit of this. You get access to people that you would not normally have access to. You get access to leading edge treatments, training programs, research that is available. You find out about conferences that are available. And I think one of the biggest things that this network does is that it creates legitimate conversation around what food addiction is. It defines what food addiction is. It provides the latest in treatments from experts such as all of us, versus having food addiction become a disease of the weak kind of thing. Oh, I eat 5 Oreos. Yep, I'm a food addict. Then going to someone who says, yep, you're a food addict. And that's not necessarily food addiction. You've got to do a full assessment. You've got to have a treatment plan in all of this. And that network provides that framework for anyone that wants to work in food addiction. Yeah. For anyone, yeah.
Because it's a Facebook group and it's not a conference, it's very formalized. And yes, you meet all the world leaders that way, but it's very structured and formalized. But this is a casual venue for people to get exactly what you're saying, where they can actually hear and get a word, because it's a Facebook group.
Exactly. And we make the recordings available to people for free in the Facebook group. If you watch a free recording from the Facebook post that I put up, you can ask a question and I will turn it over to the professional. As a matter of fact, the professional is probably in the Facebook group and will probably get tagged and respond to it on their own. And there's no cost. All of us have been to food addiction conferences that in the end cost thousands and thousands of dollars. We love it. This is part of what we do. We are willing to pay for that. But people where they're not sure if they want to treat food addiction in this way or invest in the conferences can do it for free. And you are getting conference quality material at no cost for you. And this is good for professionals. And it's also good for the public to join as well. We will let the public in as well on the Facebook group.
Actually, I didn't know that. That's good to know. Brian, we want to thank you for your willingness to step up as a chair and coordinated.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to say just if I have the moment, I work in weight management, eating disorders, support for bariatric surgery and GLP-1. So I'm involved in a lot of groups. And I just want to say that the food addiction professionals have really been the most open, willing to explore new ideas and incorporate other paradigms into how we work with people. If we have a food addiction lens, we will incorporate an eating disorder lens. We will incorporate medical weight management into it. And so I found the food addiction people to be very open compared to other areas that I work in. And that's what I really like. This is a growing field that is basically accepting people into it, that says, help us. We want to learn from everyone.
In closing, how can people find out about you and about the group?
Sure. So the group is called Sugar and Food Addiction Professionals Network. It is on Facebook, so you can search it under the initials or the actual wording, Sugar and Food Addiction Professionals Network. You can apply to join, and I will approve your registration as soon as I have the opportunity. That's how you can find out about the network. You can find out about me just by Googling my name. I have a unique name, Brian with an I, Baumal, Baumal. And from there, you will get to my website, Aliva Psychotherapy, ALIVA, psychotherapy.com. You can contact me there. You can contact me on Facebook as well if you want to join the Facebook group. And that is how you can reach me. And I am very responsive to people reaching out.
Thank you so much, Brian, for giving us your time to talk about shame and maladaptive. And
it's always my pleasure. I love our conversations. I love when we meet virtually like this. I love when we meet in the Facebook group and in person. And I encourage anyone listening to this episode to join us as well, because we are a very open group.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life Support Group. I'm Sweet Enough. Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals who offer one-to-one counseling and group coaching through Sweet Sobriety. Please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in today's episode, we'd appreciate you leaving us a review on your favorite platform. Your feedback helps grow our show and allows us to reach others who need to hear this message of recovery. Don't forget to pick up a copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies. And as Vera always says, the power is ours.